Okay, good morning. So I'll just announce our sponsorships. So the Talmud Torah sponsor for the month, Avram and Shane D. Kelman, with the hope and prayer that this past Tisha B'Av, or the future Tisha B'Av, will be a Chag filled with joy in the eternal Beis HaMikdash. The week of learning is sponsored by Akiva Andrews in honor of his wife, Dr. Karen Andrews' academic appointment as a lecturer at Hebrew University, and by Ira Miriam Grossman in the merit of a refuah shlema for all those in need. The day of learning is sponsored by David and Susan Clyde in memory of David's father, Chaim ben Shalom Zalman Zal. Our learning should be in Aliyah for his neshama. And Daf Yomi Perek sponsors Jeffrey and Sherry Venick and Stephen and Holly Venick in memory of their father, Herman Venick, Chani Yisrael ben Ruvain Zal. Herman was a beloved husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and longtime pillar of our Kehillah. May our collective learning serve as an aliyah for his neshama. Okay, so today's daf is daf ches in Masechtas Eruvin, and we are going to be picking up 7 lines down Amar Rabbah. So what we were discussing yesterday was the concept where you have a mavui that opens up to an area that's either a rechava or a chatzer that's wider than it. So we described it yesterday as a T. And then at the top of the T, there's a pirza that wall came down and opened onto a different Rishus Harabim. So initially we thought it was Machlokas Rav and Shmuel, and we said that Rav was concerned about Mefulush, the fact that you could stand there and see straight through. And ultimately we decided that it was not a Machlokas between Rav and Shmuel, and that they're actually both in agreement. Or we actually don't know that Shmuel's involved at all. There was a concern when Rabbi Yehuda said something that we assumed it must have been in the name of Shmuel instead of his Rebbe Rav, because, I'm sorry, looks like this is on mute. I apologize if it seems the system was on mute. Okay, so I'll start again very briefly. So we were dealing with yesterday with a mavoi. The mavoi opens up into either a chater or a rechava. A chater is an occupied area. A rechava is something that is not used really, so it's not considered to be inhabited. And then there was further a break from there into another Rishus Harabim. And so we had the thought that Rav was concerned about Mefulush, the fact that you're standing at the bottom here, you could look straight through the Mavoi and you could walk straight through the Mavoi, through the Chater or Rechava, and then get out in another Rishus Harabim. And whether that would make it like Mefulush, ultimately we decided that was not the primary concern here, and that what was going on here was as follows, that Rav, that this could go even like Rav, it didn't have to be Machlokas, and the fact that Rav Paskin, that you could not carry in the Mavoi, was because there was no Eruv between the Mavoi and the Chatzer, and therefore because there was no Eruv between the Mavoi and the Chatzer, that this was something that was fully open to a Makom that's Asur, and we talked about the fact that therefore you can't carry on the Mavoi. But Rav would agree that if there was an Eruv between the two, if there had been an Eruv between the Mavoi and the Chatzer, then in fact you would be able to carry. So this is an Eruv issue, not a Mefulash issue. Now, what about the fact that Rabbi Yehuda paskined that you don't need to do anything? That was because the case Rabbi Yehuda was addressing was a rechava. And a rechava, as an uninhabited area, is something that did not require an eruv. So again, if the primary issue that we were dealing with, the case of rechava and chatzer looked the same in terms of physical structure, the difference was is it a used chatzer or a non-used rechava? So since a non-used rechava doesn't require an eruv, and the entire issue here was one of Eruv and not one of Mefulash. So therefore, that's why Rabbi Yehuda said they did not need to make any adjustment. But there does not have to be any disagreement between Rabbi Yehuda's halacha, which he said on Zayin Amud Aleph, and the halacha of Rav, which we said on Zayin Amud Beis. Okay, so now we're gonna slightly change that. So we had said that this was an Eruv issue, was not a Mefulash issue. But picks up the Gemara 7 lines down, Amar Rabbah, Hada Amrit la'emtza rechava mutter. So he's picking up on, we said yesterday that Rav Yosef explained that the reason we're not worried about Mefulush is why? Because you have your Mavoi, and then you hit that T part that goes wider to the right and left. So as you're looking at the Mavoi, you see the Mavoi ends, and then there's a broader area which is the Chater or Rechava. That's clearly a different area. And then there's the opening to Rishus Harabim. So we were not worried about Mefulush. But Rabbah says, not so fast. Hada amrit la'amta rechava mutter, this that we said, that as long as you have this T-shaped and you see that it's off to the side, so that's true, it's important to see that space, but that's not enough. Lo amran elazeh shelo keneged zeh. That, nonetheless, we do have some concern about mafulosh. That if you're standing at the bottom here, and you could see straight through from one Rosh Hashanah to another, even though it goes through a rechava, even though that T area that goes to the right and left shows you that there's a interruption, at the end of the day, you have something that's open at bottom and top to a Rosh Hashanah. So Rabbah says that's going to be a problem. So it only works if there is, you have your mavui leads into the rechava or chatzar, and then slightly off to the side, right or left, you're going to have the opening to the second Rosh Hashanah. So you do not have a straight line from one Rosh Hashanah to the other. If you were to have a straight line from one Rosh Hashanah to the other, says Rabbah, that would be a problem, and you would not be able to carry. So basically, we're reintroducing this concept of mafulosh. We talked about it being an Erev issue, now we're adding back in the concept of it being mafulosh. So it continues there, he says, Aval zeh keneged zeh asar, but if it would be straight, it would be asar. So now what does it mean, though, when Rav said his halacha, he says, Mavi shenifritz b'melua, that if you have a mavi that's fully open, lechatzer, to a chatzer, v'nifritz a chatzer kenegdo, and it says opposite that, the chatzer has a broken wall to the Rosh Hashanah. That seems to be saying, you have a straight line. So Rashi explains that when it says kenegdo, just means the wall that's opposite, but nonetheless, you have to go like so. Okay? Now, so says the Gemara, Amar Rev Mesharshia. Rev Mesharshia, so now we have put two limitations on this halacha. One is that you have to have this T-shaped so that you see that there's an opening to right and left. That we learned yesterday. But now we're adding on top of that, you cannot have a straight line from one Rosh Hashanah to the other. It has to be that there's some switch. Now we're going to add another one, which is when we said that as long as you have the T and you have the non-direct openings between the Rosh Hashanahs, it's mutter, but we have another qualification. Lo amran ela rechava derabim. That only works. The case of Rabbi Yehuda, where we're dealing with a rechava, which we said we don't need an eruv, right? Is only talking about a rechava that belongs to multiple people. Aval rechava di yachid. But if that rechava in the back, so you have your mavui and your rechava is on top, if that rechava belongs to a single individual, zimnin de mimlachala ubani labatim v'have le kamavi shekala l'tzidei rechava v'aser. So I'll read that again in a second once I explain the case. So we talked about this yesterday, that Rav Yosef introduced the idea that you need this T. You need to know that when you go in your mavui, you see a space to the right and left. But let's say there was only space to the right. So what would happen is you have your wall of your mavui, followed by the wall of the rechava. Now the rechava goes off to the right, so that Rav Yosef said is a problem, because then you're seeing one straight wall. The left wall, in the example I'm saying, is the mavui wall, followed by the rechava wall, and then that leads to where the Rosh Hashanah is. So that's going to be a problem, because this is what Rav Yosef said yesterday, because you have one straight line, and so you need a full T. It can't be an L like that. Okay, so now what Rav Meshashi is introducing is, he's saying, even if you have a T in this rechava, so it opens to the right and left, I'm concerned. What is he concerned? He's concerned that maybe if the rechava belongs to an individual, that individual is going to decide, you know what? I want to take advantage of real estate here. I'm going to take the left part of the T and I'm going to build houses. Now what's going to happen? You're going to have your wall of your mavui, and then you're going to have the wall of those houses, and that's going to put you back into the situation that Rav Yosef said is a problem. So if you have a linear wall that goes all the way, includes your mavui and your rechava, that's problematic. So Rav Meshashi is saying, we're concerned that maybe the guy's going to build his house there, and we're going to end up with this line. So therefore, even before he builds it, even though we have a T, we're going to say you cannot carry unless it's a rechava of the rabbim. How does that help? Because I guess even in the times of Gemara, when you have a lot of people, you can't agree on things, and you have bureaucracy, it's not going to be so easy that you're going to build houses. But if one guy's there, he could choose to build his house. So Rav Meshashi is telling us that it has to be owned by Yachid. So now let me read it with that explanation. This that we said you could carry when you have the T and you have the non-direct line between the Rishus HaRabim, we only said that when the Rechava belongs to multiple individuals. But if the Rechava, if this back area belongs to one person, we're worried that it might happen that he'll change his mind. He'll build houses. You're going to have that straight line that Rav Yosef was worried about. It's a mavoi that then ends in the side of a Rechava, and you have one straight line, v'aser, and therefore it's going to be aser. So we're going to end up here as follows, that if you have your mavoi, followed by if it's a Rechava, you don't need an Eruv. If it's a Chatzar, you do need an Eruv, but you need 3 other qualifications. You need this T, you need to make sure that that T cannot be changed by one individual, and you need to make sure that the openings between the Rishus HaRabim have a turn so that it's not a direct straight line mefulosh from one Rishus HaRabim to the other. Okay, so now ask the Gemara, Minat Tamer the Shanilan ben Rechava the Rabim and Rechava the Yachid. Where do we have this halachic concept that we're worried that an individual is going to change something, but the Rabim aren't going to change something? Because we're saying an individual might choose to build houses, Rabim aren't going to build a house. So we're going to say as follows, the Amar, because we have later in the Masechta on Daf Tzadi Tes, we say Ravin bar Rav Ada Amar Rav Yitzchak. Ravin bar Rav Abba said in the name of Yitzchak, Ma'asu b'mavoi echad, shetzida echad kol al-yam, v'tzida echad kol al-ashba. So here's the case. You have a Rishus HaRabim, like any other mavoi, like any other case, and you have a mavoi needs 3 walls for a regular mavoi. But this mavoi is interesting. Its 3 walls were crafted in 3 different ways. So let's call it your left wall, when you're standing in Rishus HaRabim, your left wall was a garbage dump, and that garbage dump was more than 10 tefachim high. Okay, so that's one wall. On your right side was an embankment of a river or a yam. That's actually machlokas in the poskim whether rivers apply. We'll see in a minute. But you have a body of water. Now, some understand that the water itself is a mechitza, but we're going to go with the fact that as long as there is a sufficient incline, so the rule is eser b'soch arba. As long as the incline, mislaket eser b'soch arba, which is the fact that as long as you can gather 10 in 4, so what does it mean? As long as if you're walking 4 amas, the slope is such that you're climbing 10 tfachim, so then that's going to be okay because that's a steep enough wall that it's considered a mechitza. Okay, so you have your Rishus HaRabim, your left side is a garbage dump, at least 10 tfachim tall. Your right side has the embankment of a river or a sea that is 10 tfachim tall, and in front of you are the chatzers that open up. So you have houses in front of you, garbage to your left, water to your right. Okay, that seems like a fine mavi. That was the case they had. But what happened? Rebbe, and they came in front of Rebbe and said, was this an acceptable mavi that you could just put up a lechi or korah and carry in it? V'lo amar ba lo heter v'lo yiser. Rebbe didn't want to say it's aser and he didn't want to say it's mutter. Why? Iser lo yamar ba the halkaima mechitzas. He didn't want to say it's aser because at the end of the day you have valid mechitzas here. Water is a mechitza, the embankment of water, garbage is a mechitza, houses are a mechitza. So he said at the end of the day you have 3 valid walls opening to Rishus HaRabim that looks and smells like a mavoi. But heter lo yamar ba, but he also didn't want to say that they could carry in it. Why? Because chashinan shemetinata ashba v'yalaha yam sirtan. Because they're worried that those walls on the right and left might not stick around. Why? Because the garbage dump, maybe they're going to clear out the garbage. And then people will be used to carrying because there was a mechitza of garbage and now it's not there anymore, but they're still going to carry. Maybe because they don't realize it was the garbage that was the mechitza. And similarly, on the right side, you have the yam. But what happens, as is the nature, and this is why they argue about yam or rivers. Do rivers bring sediment the same way? But we won't get into it here. So the question is, the issue is, the nature of a yam is that the sediment or waves bring dirt, it accumulates, and you might end up with a much more gradual surface. So when you started, you had mislaket eser b'soch arba, which you had a steep enough incline. But now, as the dirt has come, it's become a much more gradual incline. And maybe that gradual incline doesn't make a wall. So again, people aren't going to realize that originally the reason you were able to carry is because there was garbage on your left, there was a steep wall on your right. Maybe it's going to happen, the garbage gets taken, maybe the wall is going to become less steep. So therefore, he didn't want to say mutter. So it continues, so we're looking for the source that we distinguish between Yachid and Rabbim. So far all we've seen is that we're worried about changes. But where do we see this Yachid or Rabbim thing? Continues the Gemara. Is that a reasonable concern that we have to make halachically, that we're concerned that your left wall is going to go away because someone's going to remove the garbage and it's no longer going to have the mechitza there? But wait, we had a Mishnah that is again there in Daf Tzadites later in our Masechta. Ashba b'reshus harabim gavoa yud tfachim. If you have a garbage dump that is at least 10 tfachim tall, chalon shal gaba zarkin lo b'Shabbos. That if someone has their window that's right next to that garbage dump, they can throw it out. Why? Because the garbage dump is a Rishus Yachid. His house is a Rishus Yachid. Why is the garbage dump a Rishus Yachid? Because it's 10 tfachim tall and presumably the daled tfachim, why? Daled by daled tfachim. Even if it wasn't daled by daled tfachim, it would be fine because it would be a makom patur. And because it's higher than 10 tfachim, less than daled al daled. Either way, you could throw from your Rishus Yachid to another Rishus Yachid, or to a makom patur. So therefore, if someone is lucky enough to have a garbage dump right out their window, they just toss their garbage out. They don't have to worry about it. It's not a Shabbos issue. So the question is, why is it in one case Rebbe was concerned maybe the garbage is going to get taken away and then the wall's not going to be there? On the other hand, someone can always throw their garbage out. Why not say, wait, don't let him throw the garbage out the window because maybe someone's going to remove the garbage and then it's no longer Rishus Yachid because it's only Rishus Yachid because there's garbage piled up more than 10 tefachim. But if someone's going to move the garbage, he's going to be used to throwing his trash out the window. He's going to throw it out the window, and it's going to land in Rishus Harabim, and he'll have thrown from Rishus Yachid to Rishus Harabim. So why aren't we worried about that? So the answer is, Alma Shani Ben Ashba the Rabim, Ashba the Yachid, that it must be, the reason that we're worried in Rebbe's case that the garbage is going to get taken away is it must be that garbage dump was owned by an individual, and that individual might decide, you know what, I'm sick of having garbage in my place, and he's going to clear it out, and now the wall of the Mavoi is gone. On the other hand, when you have a garbage dump in Rishus Harabim, presumably it belongs to the Rabbim. Things that belong to the Rabbim don't change that often, and therefore, we're not concerned. So says the Gemara, Hachinami, Shani ben Rechava the Rabbim, Rechava the Yachid. So this is where we get this idea of Reb Misharshia, that Reb Misharshia says, even the T is going to be a problem if it's owned by an individual, because maybe he's going to put houses up on one side of the T, and you'll be left with an L, and that would be a problem because you no longer see the distinction. It looks like one straight line from your Mavi through your Rechava. Okay, so now, we had the case of Rebbe, where Rebbe said, we're worried maybe the garbage gets taken away, or maybe the Yam brings up sediment. So what about, the Gemara asks, Rabbanon Mai. So that was Rebbe's concern. What did the rabbis paskin? What did the Rabbanim say? So I'm Rav Yosef by Rav Dimi. Rav Yosef by Rav Dimi says, Tana, we learned, B'chachamim osrim. And the Chachamim, even though Rebbe was not prepared to say that it's asur or mutter, it's mutter because technically they're mechitzos, but asur because he might have said asur because he's worried people are they're gonna get taken away and people will still carry. The Chachamim weren't so worried, they said asur. Rav Nachman halacha k'devrei Chachamim. Rav Nachman says that's in fact halacha, that we're worried that it's gonna get taken away, and therefore you cannot rely on this mavoi, on a mavoi that for one of its walls relies on either the sea or on a pile of garbage. Ikadarmi, there are others who say, Rav Yosef bar Avdimi, that Rav Yosef bar Avdimi said, Tana, we learned from Chachamim Matirin, that the Chachamim said at the end of the day, the Rebbe was doubtful, and they said, no, it's okay because you have all three walls. To this, Rav Nachman, ein halacha k'devrei Chachamim. So Rav Nachman's consistent regardless of which version. He's saying, at the end of the day, Rebbe was uncertain, but I am certain that in fact you cannot rely on a garbage pile that could get taken away, or a sea that could bring up sediment and change the slope. Okay. Mireimar pasuk la lesura bu'uzle. So this is kind of unrelated, but it just has to do with this idea of the slope of the water changing. So what happened? That in Surah they had one or more mavois where you had your Rishus Harabim, and then the mavoi comes off, and the back of the mavoi was the sea. So now, this might be like in Venice or somewhere, like you'd have this. But what was the concern? The concern was, if you're relying on the sea to be your back mechitza, your third mechitza, what's going to happen if the slope of the water changes? And as we said before, it's not steep enough to be considered a mechitza. So then it's going to be a problem because you're carrying in this mavui relying that your third wall is the sea, and really the sea has shifted and it's no longer mechitza. So Meremar was actually worried about that. So therefore he set up pasikle, he separated the edge of the sea with uzli, he put up nets. So a net is a valid mechitza, and he put up a mechitza in the back as a safety precaution. So you see that there was a concern. Amar chashinu shema yala yam sirtan, that there is in fact this concern that maybe the incline of the sea is going to change and it will no longer be a mechitza. Okay, continues the Gemara. We are 11 lines up, beginning of the line. Hahu mavai akum dahave besura. So we just talked about surah, so now we're going to go back to our favorite topic of mavai akum. So mavai akum, as we talked about, is an L-shaped or a race-shaped, as you choose to call it. It was a machlokas, Rav and Shmuel. Rav said that it's treated like mafulosh. We look at these, we ignore the bend and look at it like any other mavui that is open on two ends to the Rishis Rabbim. And Shmuel said no. And also Rav was the one who paskined like the Tanakama and said all you need is a tzuris HaPesach on one end and a lechi yakar on the other end. And Shmuel was the one that said, wait, you need an actual deles, a doorway on one end, and a lechi yakar on the other end. Okay, so all that's going to come into play here. So you had in Surah a certain mavui yakum, you had this L-shaped mavui. So what did they do? Karach budya v'osive bei bakmu musei. So they wound up they rolled up a machatzelas, a mat, and they put it in the bend. I'll explain in a minute. There's some possible different girsa, but the idea was they wanted to make a lechi, so they rolled up a mat. It's now this round mat, and they put it up as to serve as a lechi in the bend over there. So Amar Rav Chisda said, I don't get it. So the way we understand this Gemara is that at the bottom of one entrance to Rishis Harabim they stuck a lechi, and then at the bend they put this rolled up thing. This is not really a lechi discussion. This has more to do with, this is not really what you need to fix this mavai. It has more to do with what they used as a lechi, but we'll see in a second. Amar Rav Chisda, halo karav lo kishmuel. What are they doing here? This is not like Rav and it's not like Shmuel. Why? L'Rav damer tarasa k'mafulosh. Okay, so if you're going like Rav who says that this is a mafulosh, then tzuris ha-pesach bai. Then you need on one end a tzuris ha-pesach, and on the other end, a lechi. And the way we've done that in the past was by putting a tzuris ha-pesach at the bend and a lechi on either end of these mavuis. But here, they didn't put up a tzuris ha-pesach. They put up a rolled up mat. So, tzuris ha-pesach by l'shmuel, and so it's not like Rav. L'shmuel damer tarasa kesasam. Okay, so maybe it's like Shmuel who says that you need that each of these mavuis are considered like private mavuis. So says the Gemara, Hani mili lechi malya. So that makes sense. Shmuel says. So what did Shmuel say? Shmuel said you just put a lechi on either end. Now, according, we talked about it briefly. Rashi brought from his Rebbe that not only do you need a lechi on either end, you need a lechi in the bend. This is why I was saying before. So it's not so clear. So according to Rashi's Rebbe, it's clear what happened here. They needed a lechi in the bend because one of let's say the top mavoi didn't choose to put a lechi at its end. Only the vertical mavoi wanted to put it. So at the end of the day, they needed to put one lechi here and they needed to put a lechi in the middle like Rashi's Rebbe. But according to Rashi, who understood Shmuel, as you just put one lechi here and one lechi here, so it wasn't clear why they were messing with the bend, because you don't need anything there. So some have a girsa that they put a tzuris ha-pesach with this mat. Others have a girsa that they put the rolled up mat at the entrance to the Rishis Harabim. So not in the bend, but in the bottom. But whatever the point is, this sugya is really about whether that's an acceptable lechi to roll up a mat. So we don't have to get into the details of why they put it there, but they put somewhere this rolled up mat. So they say it's not like Shmuel either, because when did Shmuel say it's enough to have a lechi on each end? Is if the lechi is a valid lechi. Aval hai kivan the nasher bezika v'shadilei lo klumhu. But this, as you put up this rolled up mat, as soon as a wind comes, it's going to blow it down. That's not a valid lechi. So I don't get what happened here. First of all, maybe it's not like Rav that you treat it like foolish. And even if it is, and then you need a tzuris ha-pesach. And even if it's like Shmuel, it says it's a sasum, at the end of the day, you put up a flimsy lechi here. So says the Gemara, v'inoyet beisichta v'chavre chavre. But if you stuck like a stake in it, meaning that you attached this rolled up mat to the wall, wherever it is that you put it, that's considered, it's attached, and then it becomes a valid lechi, and is strong enough, and it's going to withstand wind, and therefore it's a valid lechi. Again, this is an issue having to do with not where you place the lechi, but what is the lechi. Okay, Gulfa, we learned, so this is going to quote the psak of Rav that we spent a lot of time on yesterday. Now yesterday, when we spent time on the psak of Rav, was really focused on the mavoi. The idea that the people in the mavoi cannot carry if it opens to a chatzar with which they don't have an eruv. And we talked about this yesterday because it's parts b'mulua l'makam ha'asar law, that if you have a space, the mavoi is open in its entirety, because the full width of the mavoi was open to the chatzar, and the chatzar is a makam that's asar to it because you can't carry from the mavoi into the chatzar. So therefore we said carrying in the mavoi was asar. That's what we focused on yesterday with Rav. Now we're going to focus on the other side of Rav's halacha, which we discussed yesterday, but that wasn't really the focus of the Gemara, which is the chatzar. So Rav said that the chatzar is mutter to carry in, regardless of whether the mavoi is asar. Why was that? Because from our perspective, the way we explained it yesterday was that if you're standing in the chatzar, remember this is a T shape, so the mavoi is narrower, and then the chatzar becomes wider on either side. So if I'm standing in the chatzar looking back toward the mavoi, what do I see? I see two walls, and then there's a break. Presumably that break is less than 10 amos, and we know as long as you have more wall than you have opening, and the opening is not greater than 10 amos, we look at that as like a door, a pesach. Okay, now I turn 180 degrees, I look at the Rishus Harabim break, and what do I see? I see two walls, and I see a Rishus Harabim, and the opening is less than 10 amos, and there's more wall than opening. So we said, in the chatzar you could carry regardless. The fact that the chatzar is open to the mavoi, I don't care, because, in other words, a chatzar does not have to join with a mavoi, and a mavoi does not preclude the people in the chatzar from carrying, because someone could say, I'm my own chatzar, we have our own eruv chetzeros, and we're not interested in carrying to the mavoi. So therefore, we said that carrying in the chatzor is mutter. So we're going to focus a little bit on that halacha. Says the Gemara Gufa, we learned, Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba, Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba says in the name of Rav, mavoi shenifres b'mulu al chatzor. To our case from yesterday, your mavoi opens up got broken in its entirety, the full width of the mavoi got open to a chatzor, v'nifres a chatzor kenegdo, and in fact, the chatzor also had the wall opposite that open to Rishus Harabim. So even though you have this straight line from, or maybe it's off, we discussed yesterday, but you have this connection that people walk through. We said chatzar mutaris and mavoi aser, that the chatzar is mutar and the mavoi is aser for the reasons I just described. Amrlei Rabba bar Ula l'Rabibi bar Abaya. So Rabba bar Ula said to Rabibi bar Abaya, Rabbi lomash naseni hizu. They said, wait a second. Why is Rav in Amora coming and telling us this? We already learned it in a Mishnah. Where did we learn it? Because we learn later on, actually we'll have it in Mitzvah tomorrow, that if you have chatzar ketana shenifritza l'gedola, that if you have a small chatzar that got an opening made between it and a broader mechitza. So if you want to think about it like this, you have a large chatzar here, and you have a small chatzar on top that's fully open to the bottom wider chatzar, right? So we're going to say, so you have a chatzar ketana shenifritza l'gedola, you have a small chatzar that opens up onto a bigger one. So we say gedola muteres. The big one can carry, and the fact that they didn't do an eruv with the people in the small one doesn't matter. Why? Because again, you have walls on either side, and from their perspective, it's just a pesach, it's just a doorway. Ukatana asura, but you can't carry in the katana. Why? Because it's like the entranceway of the gedola, meaning from the perspective of the smaller chatzar, if you're standing in the smaller chatzar, you just see fully into the big chatzar. There are no walls that separate you, because the walls are only on the outside, but the opening is from the full width of the small chatzar. So we say in the small chatzar you cannot carry, because you're part of the bigger chatzar from your perspective, and if you didn't make an eruv with the people in the bigger chatzar, then you're out of luck. So the question is, why did Rav need to tell me that, if you think about it, the mavoi that we talked about yesterday that opens to the chatzar, the mavoi is the narrower thing, that opens to the broader thing. So we're saying the broader one can carry, the chatzar is mutter, the mavoi is aser. So what did I need Rav to tell that to me? I know it from this Mishnah. It's exactly a case of a small chatzar that opens into a bigger chatzar. The bigger chatzar is mutter. The small chatzar, in this case, would be the equivalent of the mavoi, is aser. So what did I need Rav for? Amrlei. So he said back to him, Ime hasam, if I only had the description of the chatzar gadol and the chatzar katana, I would say, Hava mina hani mili hechadola kadarsi barabim. Aval hechad kadarsi barabim, ema afilu chatzar nami. So you say, I would think as follows, that if all I had was something that said, the case, remember the case that in the Mishnah we'll deal with tomorrow, you have a large chatzar and a small chatzar, but you're not using the small chatzar as, or the large chatzar, and more importantly, as a passageway, right? It's just two chatzeros that happen to be next to each other that got a wall broken between them. But the case Rav told us was where what happened, where you had a mavoi opens to a chatzar that in turn opens to Rosh Hashanah. So it's actually a thoroughfare. It's a throughway. You could go from one Rosh Hashanah to the other. So maybe I wouldn't have known that from the Mishnah of the small chatzar and the large chatzar. So that's why I needed Rav to tell me his halacha. So the Gemara says, wait a second. I didn't need you to tell me that either. But this we also learned because we have a Mishnah that's later in our Masechta and Daf Chav Beis, which says Chatzer Sharabim Nechnasin La Bezu V'Yotzin La Bezu, that if you have a Chatzer that people travel by, they traverse it. The exact case of Rav that we say Rishus Harabim Matumah Rishus Yachid the Shabbos. So let me explain what this is talking about. So as we've encountered many times, there's a notion of Safek Tumah B'Rishus Harabim is mutter, and Safek Tumah B'Rishus Yachid is aser. This idea comes from Sota. The pasuk says V'nistera v'hi nitma. So this is the idea. Even though we have a suffix, because we don't know for certain that the woman did anything wrong when she secluded herself with a man as a Sota, and yet we say as long as they were in secret, we're going to say that we assume that they did something wrong, unless it's proven otherwise by drinking the Sota waters, right? So you see that a Safek Tumah in Rishus Yachid, if it's a private place, then it's Aser. But if it would be in a more public place, it's Mutter, because we learned from the paradigm of Sota. That's a concept we've had before. So now what the Mishnah is saying is as follows. There's an interesting thing. If you have a Chatzar that people are traversing through, so from a Shabbos perspective, we're not worried. Why? Because we've described this multiple times, even today. You have two doorways as far as we're concerned. Halachically, doorways don't impede a mechitza. So you have four walls of this mechitza. The fact that you have two doorways that people can walk through doesn't change the fact that it is a Rishus HaYachid that's surrounded on all four sides by walls. There just happen to be two doors that people walk through. So for Shabbos purposes, where we're interested in a mechitza, so there's halachic mechitza. But as relates to Tumah, it's not so simple, because what's the paradigmatic case is Sota. Sota, when she's together with the man in the room, who's there? No one. If anyone else was there, it wouldn't be a case of Sota. So therefore, we're saying that the type of Rishus HaYachid you need for Tumah issues means there aren't people there. So ultimately, if you have this as a chatzar that is a thoroughfare, people are walking through, that doesn't match the paradigmatic case of Sota. So that's why the Mishnah comes up with this interesting distinction, that if you have a chatzar that people walk through, for Shabbos purposes, you could say these are valid mechitzas, and therefore we're going to treat it as a Rishus HaYachid. For Sota purposes, this is not really a private area, so we're going to treat it like Rishus HaRabim. So that's what the Mishnah said. But forget the Sota part now. We're focused on the Rishus HaYachid l'Shabbos. So we thought that maybe Rav had to say his halach in order to tell us that when multiple people walk through, that nonetheless you could still carry in the Chatzar. Says the Gemara, I don't need Rav to tell me that. I have a Mishnah that says it's a Rishus HaYachid l'Shabbos, even when people traverse it. So the Gemara says, oh, you're right. So we have to explain why Rav had to say his halacha, because the fact that it's traversed, you see from the Mishnah tomorrow. The fact that you have the smaller place, is usher to carry, and while the bigger one is mutter, we see that from Daf Tzadites. So what was Rav teaching us that we didn't already know from a Mishnah? So the Gemara says, Imei Hasam, if I was only learning it from the case where it tells me that even though people walk through it, it's Rishus HaYachid l'Shabbos, I might have said that what is that case where they say, even though, we're now going to Amma Beis, what is that case where they said, even though that people traverse between it, maybe that's only when the openings in the Chatzar aren't opposite each other. But our case of Rav was Avalzeh Keneged Zeh, Emolo. But our case of Rav was talking about where they, and as of yesterday's understanding, was talking about where they were opposite each other. So maybe that was Rav's chiddush, is to tell you, even though the openings in the Rosh Hashanah are mafulosh, they're in a straight line, as long as you have the mavoi followed by a wider chatzar or rechaver, you're okay. So the Gemara says, well, that would have worked yesterday as a good answer. But wait, this morning when we started the daf, we learned that Rabbah says that it cannot be a straight line, that it has to be, you have to make a turn, and you cannot have the openings to the Rosh Hashanah face each other. So that can't possibly be Rav's chiddush, according to Rabbah. Says the Gemara, Rabbah Damar Zekeneged Zel Asr, the one who, Rabbah who says that if they are in fact lined up one opposite the other, the openings to the Rosh Hashanah will be Asr, Hadar Rabbah Maimuki law. So then, what would he establish when Rav says is halacha? What's the case? It must be b'zeh shelo keneged zeh, that they're not the same. So we're back to our question. Tarti lamali. Why do I need Rav to tell me in a halacha that I already knew from two mishnayos? So the Gemara says, okay, I'll tell you what Rav's teaching us that we wouldn't have known. That when the Mishnah told us that a chatzar that Rabbim darsim, that people go through it is mutter. I might ime hasam, if I was only learning from that Mishnah, I might have said, Hava mina hani milu lizrok, avolataltal emalo kamash malan. Then I might have thought that what does it mean as Rosh Hashanah l'Shabbos is telling you that even though people traverse through it, nonetheless it is mid'araisa Rosh Hashanah, and if someone were to throw something from the Rosh Hashanah into this chatzar, he'd be chayev and being over on Hilchos Shabbos. But maybe that's all the Mishnah meant, is that it's a Rosh Hashanah for purposes of restriction. But is it such a Rosh Hashanah that we're convinced that people could carry, and that it's considered a fully enclosed mechitza that we would allow them to carry, and not midrabanan say, sorry, there's people walking through this chatzar, you can't carry? Says Rav, I'm coming to tell you that in the chatzar you can carry, even though people traverse their way through it. So while it is true that I would have learned from the Mishnah on Tzadi Tes that the Mavoi is Aser, and I would have learned from the combination of the Mishnah on Tzadi Tes plus tomorrow's Gemara that a chatzar is mutter, that a chatzar is a Rosh Hashanah, even if people are traversing it, I would not have known that you could actually carry, and that's the chiddush that Rav was teaching us. Says the Gemara, fifth line down, Itmar, Mavoi ha'asa ken nadal. So if you had a mavoi that was made like a nadal seems to be like a centipede or something like that, some bug with multiple legs. So what the Gemara is, the case we're going to deal with is as follows. You can see Tosas has a different version of it, but basically the way Rashi understands is you have the following. You have a mavoi going across, and then you have multiple legs that are mavois coming down that open into a different Rosh Hashanah, a different Rosh Hashanah. I'm sorry. So if you want to think about it, what you essentially have is you have many mavoi akums, because you have this one Rosh Hashanah. So you could go here and then down the first one. You could go down the top one and down the second, third, whatever it is. So you have multiple mavoi akums. That's the case we're dealing with. That's this nadol, this centipede. Mavoi asakinado. Amar Abaya osa tzuris hapesach legadol v'hanach kulo mystery belachi v'kora. So says Abaya, okay, I'll give you the solution. Up here on this big Rosh Hashanah, put a tzuris hapesach, and then on the bottom Rosh Hashanah, just at the 90-degree angle, just stick a lechi or a korah on each one. So this way you'll have a tzuris hapesach on one side and a lechi or korah on the other side. Says the Gemara, Amalei Rava. Rava said back to Abaya, come on. So who are you going like when you say that? You must be going like Shmuel. Because remember, Rav is the one that says when you have a mavoi akum, a bent mavoi, we treat that like a mavoi mafulish. And you need a tzuris hapesach and a lechi or korah on the other end at a minimum, maybe a delas, according to Chananya. But in other words, if you treat it like a mavoi mafulish, you need some kind of tzuris hapesach at the bend, and you need a lechi on either end, right? And so if we're treating, and Shmuel says it's mavoi sasum, that each mavoi is its own because it turns the corner, doesn't matter, and you just put, according to Shmuel, you put a lechi on this one, and then a lechi on the three others, and you're good to go, right? So Rava says, come on, you're going to Shmuel, Damar Tarasa Kasasum, then it's like Sasum. So ask the Gemara, but if you're going like Rava, like Shmuel, who says that it's a Sasum, Lamalei Tzuris HaPesach, So then why did Abaye say put a Tzuras HaPesach here? All you should need is a lechi at every entrance and you're good, because according to Shmuel, we don't look at these Mavoi Akums as Mavoi Mufulish, and they're all just a bunch of Mavoi Sasums, and a Mavoi Sasum only needs one lechi. So we're saying, what you're paskening like Shmuel, that's a Mavoi Sasum, but for some reason, Abaye, you're saying that we should put up a Tzuras HaPesach. So, and furthermore, so it says the Gemara, not only that, yesterday we learned that there was a Mavoi Akum in Nardoi, and they ended up paskening like Rav, and they required, we talked about this, the Lassos, either they had the Chumrah of Rav and Shmuel, or they had like Rav, Ahlach of Vein Morin came, but the point was that in Nardoi, which was the city of Shmuel, they were worried about Rav's psak, so clearly the halacha should follow Rav at some level. So first of all, what you outlined doesn't even match Shmuel, because why do you need a Tzuras HaPesach? And second of all, you should be going like Rav. If you're going like Rav, what would you need? You should need a Tzuras HaPesach at each bend, and a lechi at each end. So says the Gemara, that's in fact what we have. Elo Amar Rava, Rava says, here's what you do, not like what Abaye said, but rather, Oset Tzuras HaPesach l'kulo, you should put so you have the big Rosh Hashanah and you have the small ones. So each one at the bend, meaning at the top of the small mavui, you should put a Tzuras HaPesach l'hai gisa to this side, ve'idach gisa mishtri b'lechi v'kora. Then on the bottom, the bottom that opens the Rosh Hashanah, as well as over here on the side that opens the Rosh Hashanah, you should put a lechi or kora, and we're good. So now we're saying, Rav is saying that ignore what Abaye said, where you put one Tzuras HaPesach and then lechis at the rest. Rather, you put a Tzuras HaPesach at each bend, and a lechi at each opening to the Rosh Hashanah, and we're good, and that matches Rav's halacha exactly. Okay, Rav Kahana bar Tachlifa, Rav Kahana bar Tachlifa said in the name of Mishmei Rav Kahana bar Manyume, who said in the name of Mishmei Rav Kahana bar Malkio, who said Mishmei Rav Kahana Rabbi the Rav, in the name of Rav Kahana the Rebbe of Rav. Va'amri la, some said Rav Kahana bar Malkio, Hainu Rav Kahana Rabbi the Rav. That maybe these last two people are the same person. But whatever the point was, we had a bunch of kahanas saying a halacha. So, because all sorts of people name Rav Kahana. So what's the halacha that they say? Mavi shetzidei echad aruch, v'tzidei echad katzer. Okay, so let's describe the case. Let's say you had a Rosh Hashanah that was wide, and then what happened? The Rosh Hashanah got narrowed. Okay? So it went from wide to narrow. So what's gonna have? If you were walking in my side, if you were walking on the right side of the Mavoi, of the Rosh Hashanah, at a certain point, you're going to hit a wall, because the Rosh Hashanah moved over. At that point, when you hit the top, on your right side is going to be a Mavoi. I apologize, the Rav has that book, it would be helpful to have a picture, but that's the basic gist here. So what happens at this Mavoi? When you're looking at this Mavoi, you have one wall of the Mavoi is that wall that now cuts off the Rosh Hashanah, because the Rosh Hashanah got smaller. So that wall is long, but the other wall of the Mavui was with the original wider version of the Rosh Hashanah. So you have a scenario where the front of your Mavui, I'll try and keep it with the way I was showing you. You have a long wall and you have a shorter wall. So the issue is, so you have the question is, if you were going up the Rosh Hashanah, you would make a right into this Mavui, but there's a longer wall and a shorter wall that comprise the two walls of the Mavoi. So we're going to say as follows. I hope that made sense. We have one wall is long with tzidei echad katzer and one wall is short. So it's saying, as long as it's less than 4 amos, that the longer wall is longer than the shorter wall. Why 4 amos? Because if it's 4 amos or more, it gets its own status as a mavui. And so then that's not gonna be treated as part of the other mavui. But the idea would be that if you have a long wall and a short wall, then, you could just put the, korah on a slant, and then you're gonna pick up a little bit of the Rosh Hashanah, because the korah is gonna define the area of the mavui. Arba amas, but if you have a 4 wall, the longer wall is more than 4 amas longer than the shorter wall, then you can't do it on a slant, and you just have to line up the korah where, at the point where the shorter wall and the longer wall, you rest it on the longer wall at the end of the shorter wall. Okay? So, Rava Amar Rava says, even if it's less than 4 amos, you cannot put a korah at a slant here. So, and Rava says, I'm going to tell you my reasoning, and I'm going to tell you the reason, I who say you cannot put up a slanted korah, and I'm going to tell you the reasons of the people who say you can put up a slanted korah. I'll tell you my reason that you could put a slanted korah. Why? Because korah time of my, what's the reason we have a korah, mishum heker, is to distinguish to people that this area you're about to enter, or about to leave, we'll see that in a second, is different than the Rishus Harabim. So the issue is, in the Mavoi you're allowed to carry, in the Rishus Harabim you're not. So we need to show people, even though the Mavoi is pretty open to Rishus Harabim, the reason people are able to carry there is because it's a Mavoi, and it's not the Rishus Harabim. That's the function of a Korah, according to Rava. So therefore, Balaksan lo ave heker, when you have a slanted Korah, it's not clear. Presumably, Rashi, I'm not 100% clear this is what he's saying, but I think the idea would be that if you're picking up with your slant, you're picking up part of the Rishus Harabim, and then people are like, it's one thing if you see a Mavoi and you see a Rishus Harabim and there's a Korah between them, but here you have this like slanted Korah that seems to pick up part of the Rishus Harabim, part of the Mavoi. So he says if it's for a heker, it's not a good recognition that you're transitioning, so therefore it doesn't serve its purpose. That's Rava's point. I'll tell you the point of the people who say you can put it on a slant. Korah mishamai, according to them, what's the function of a korah? Mishum mechitza. It's there to put a wall, a halachic wall, because we know that if you have something, we talked about this, pitik or yored v'sosem, that the edge of it can come down, and it's as if the mavoi has a fourth wall. If the mavoi has a fourth wall, then of course you can carry in it regularly, because it's a four-wall enclosed rishus yachid. So therefore, ubalaksa now we have a mechitza. That at the end of the day, if we're dealing with halachic mechitzas, you could have a mechitza on a slant, you could have it on a zigzag, you could do whatever you want, because you're looking at a halachic concept, not at the need to show people that there's a distinction between this area and that area. Rav Kahana. So we quoted this halacha in the name of a bunch of people named Rav Kahana. So now Rav Kahana, plain Rav Kahana says, Ho shmaitzet the kahani. Once there are all these kahanas who are saying things, Ema b'milsa, I'm going to tell you something else. Also, Hada Amrit, this that we said, Meniach HaKorim Balakson, when we said, according to some, you could put the Korah on a slant, Lo Amron Elashale Im Balaksono Yoser Me Eser. He says, it still is true that you cannot have an entry, as we learned in the first mission in Eruvin, the entry to a Mavoi, unless you have Tzuras HaPesach, cannot be wider than 10 amas. So the issue is the following. If you're going, let's say you had, if the entry to the Mavoi was 10 amas wide, right? But now you shift it somewhat and make it a slant, the slant is going to be more than 10 amas. So you're going to end up, since the slant, says Rav Kahana, is going to define the Mavoi, you're going to end up with a Mavoi whose opening is greater than 10 amas. That you can't do. If you're going to have more than 10 amas, everyone's going to say you cannot do that. Ela keneged hakatzer. You would have to do it on the straight portion, the part that is 10 or less. But if, let's say, your opening to your Mavoi was like 7 amas, and you shift it a little bit, and with a slant that makes it 8.5 amas, that's going to be okay. Okay, Iboilahu, ask the Gemara, what is the halacha? We dealt with this briefly earlier in the Masechta, that what's the halacha? If you put up a korah, we're talking about a regular, Rashi says a regular Mavoi now. You have a Mavoi, you have a korah, can you carry underneath the korah? Rav, Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Yochanan, Amru Mutal Shtamish Tachat HaKorah. Rav and Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yochanan say, yes, you can carry under the Korah. Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon bar Rabbi, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Amru Asur L'Shtamish Tachat HaKorah. But Shmuel and Rabbi Shimon bar Rabbi and Reish Lakish say you cannot carry underneath the Korah. So says the Gemara, Lema B'Hakam Miflagi. Let's say that what they're arguing about is the following. The Mar Savar Korah Mishum Heker, Umar Savar Korah Mishum Mechitza. So the Gemara is going to say as follows. That the one who says you can carry underneath the Korah, why? Is because the point of the Korah is just to tell you you're transitioning from Rishus Harabim to a Mavoi or vice versa. And so as long as it gives you that recognition, it's fine. So even when you're standing underneath it, you're getting that recognition. But if you hold that Korah is Mishum Mechitza, that maybe it's the inner lip of the Korah that comes down, and if it's the inner lip of the Korah that comes down because it's a Mechitza, then obviously you can't carry underneath the Korah, because that's already outside of the Mechitza that's creating the Mavoi. So the Gemara says, lo, That's not what they're arguing about. Because maybe the Kuliyama Korah Mishum Heker. Maybe everyone holds that the point of a Korah is so that you should have a distinction between the two areas. That here's what they're arguing about. The Mar Savar Hekerim of Gav, Umar Savar Hekerim of Var. So the question is, when you put up a Korah, who are you showing the Korah to? Are you telling the people who are inside, you're allowed to carry here, but don't carry into Rosh Hashanah? Or are you telling the people in Rosh Hashanah, you see those people carrying in that mavoi? That's only because they're inside a mavoi, but you can't carry where you are. So if the point of a korah is to remind the people who are inside the mavoi, so then it's going to be the inner lip that reminds them, because that's what they see. So then we're going to say that therefore they can only carry up to that inner lip. If it's the people outside, they're seeing the outside edge of the korah, so we're going to say you can only, that therefore the mavoi extends until the outside edge, because it's really for the outside people, so therefore you would be able to carry underneath the underneath the korah. Alternatively, I'll tell you, the kuliyam mechitza, everyone holds that the function of a korah is to create a mechitza. This is why one says you can carry under and one says you can't. The one who says you cannot carry under the korah says that the inner lip of the korah is what comes down. So then obviously underneath the korah is outside of the mavui. And the other one says, no, it's the outer edge that comes down. And if it's the outer edge, then you can carry up until that outer edge, including underneath the korah. So Rav Chisda says, that everyone agrees that across from a lechi, you cannot carry. While under a korah, because a korah is at least a tefach wide, but a lechi could be minuscule. We'll learn that halacha. So if we let you carry across from a minuscule separation, it could be that you're going to cross that line. A thick tefach you can judge, but a thin lechi you can't. Rami Rachama asked Rav Chisda the following interesting question. So here's what happened. You have a mavah, you have walls, and then you have the mavah that opens. So instead of putting the korah on top of those walls, what did I do? I put in 2 stakes into the wall, and then I put the korah on top. So what happened? The korah is just outside the walls. It's adjoining the walls, but it's not on top of the walls. That's the case. Is that a valid one? So Amrlei, L'divrei hamater aser, L'divrei oser mutter. So we say as follows, that according to the person who said that you can carry under, the person who said you could carry under the, I'm sorry, one second. L'divrei hamater. Okay, so we say, I'm sorry, so we're gonna say as follows, that according to one who said you could carry under the korah, why is that? Is because it's the outside edge of the korah that goes down. So in this scenario where you have the walls, and then you have the korah in front of it, so the outside edge is where? It's a tefach removed from the walls. So then you have a break, and that doesn't work. But according to the one who said you cannot carry under the korah, why would that be? That would be because the inner edge of the korah comes down. So in this case, where the inner edge, where the whole korah is adjoining the walls, so if it's the inner edge that comes down, so the inner edge is coming down, there's no space between the end of the korah and the inner edge, because the inner edge is resting against the walls of the mavui, so now you have a valid enclosure. So the issue is, if you held that you could carry under the korah, it's because the outer edge doesn't, and now that the korah is instead of on top of the walls, adjoining the walls, so then the korah's mechitza is a tefach removed from the walls. But if you held that the inner edge is the one that went down, so then in this case, the inner edge is abutting the walls of the mavoi, and it's going to be good. To which Rava says, "L'didi ha'oser nami aser." Rava Amar l'divrei ha'oser nami aser, but inan kara agabe mavoi v'leka. He says, no, it doesn't help, because even if the inner edge goes down, and this mechitza is flush against the walls, at the end of the day, the proper place for a korah is on top of the walls, not on the edge of the walls, not off the side of the walls, and therefore it would be usher. This would not be a valid korah. You need to put a different one on top of the walls. Have a wonderful day.